Okay, this is from the post Cottages, exclamation point, exclamation point, in the Civ IV strategy articles, started by Dave MCW on December 8th, 2008. It's about cottages. It takes about 4 worker turns to build a cottage, and a brand new cottage will give 1 commerce. If a citizen is working the cottage that's worth 1 commerce and took 4 worker turns to build, then after 10 turns, it will become a hamlet. So it's worth 2 commerce. Then if you work that for 20 turns more, if you work the hamlet for 20 turns more, it will turn into a village, which is worth 3 commerce. Then if you work a village for 40 turns, it will turn into a town worth 4 commerce. So 4 worker turns, you get a cottage. 10 citizen turns, you get a hamlet. 20 citizen turns, you get a village. And then 40 citizen turns, you get a town. Cottage is 1 commerce, hamlet 2, village 3, and town 4. Okay, now there are some things that the cottages benefit from. If your leader has the financial trait, generally it will add 1 on tiles that already offer 2 gold. So he says here that it's 1 commerce from river cottages because you get an extra gold being next to a river. So that's 2. And then the financial trait will make it 3. Hamlets are worth 2 commerce, so you'll get the +1 on that. Oh, and villages and towns, I guess if it's 2 or more commerce, you get the extra 1. The technology printing press adds 1 for villages and towns. The free speech civic adds 2 commerce to towns. Emancipation, that's another civic. That doubles the rates at which the cottages, hamlets, and villages will grow. The universal suffrage civic gives 1 hammer to towns extra. It also allows you to take gold and rush buy items in a city. So essentially it converts your gold to hammers. If you get the Kremlin Wonder, which you can get I think under the communism civic, it makes the I think it's half price for the ability to rush buy items in a city, which you get with the universal suffrage civic. A golden age adds 1 commerce for cottages, hamlets, villages, towns. That's because it adds 1 commerce to things that already have commerce in a golden age. Also, it adds a hammer to towns with universal suffrage. That's because you already have a hammer there, because the golden age adds hammers to things that already have hammers. According to Dave MCW, if you get all of those bonuses, your towns will be the best tile improvement in the game. Okay, now he says you can save hammers by grouping your cottages in specialized cities. So he calls it, Dave MCW does, the cottage city. He says it gets libraries, universities, observatories, academies, and banks. But I notice he left out markets and grocers, for example. The Milanese get the mint, which is a forge with a +10% on commerce. So you're going to have to take actually a little closer look, I think, than Dave MCW does here. It may be that he did this guide for a previous version of Civilization that may not have had, I don't know, markets and grocers or mints for the Milanese. or things of that sort. But the basic idea is in the cities with cottages, you put items that use the commerce. So the rule that he gives is that a cottage city can feed 10 cottages before biology. Now he gives a food score where he says +1 for floodplains, but I mean floodplains get +1 food. The grassland are considered 0 because they're food neutral. 2 food feeds 1 population. So if you work a grassland, you get equal food to a population, so that's +0. Floodplains have 3 food, so it's 1 above food neutral. Grassland hills, um, even if they have forests, are -1. That's because they only have 1 food on them, so they're 1 food short. Plains are -1, they're 1 food short. And freshwater tundra is -1 because they're also 1 food short. So again, floodplains +1, grassland +0, grassland hill -1, plains -1, and freshwater tundra -1. So basically you take the 10 best tiles that you can put a cottage on, and you add them together, and he says if your score is negative, it will not make a good cottage city. Basically, the idea is to make it food neutral for the 10 tiles. A commerce resource he counts as 1 cottage. Coasts for financial civs, because you get an extra gold in the tile from them, are half a cottage in the way he figures things out. And non-financial coast he considers junk. All right, growing cottages. So you can, in a cottage city, assign the commerce emphasize commerce button to make sure that it works your cottages. So that would be a good way. It will also, if you emphasize commerce, the workers by that city will build commerce improvements mostly. So that will be a way to save you some time in the game. You want to grow your city as quick as possible and then move the workers to the cottages. All right, rule number 2. Build a granary as soon as possible in every city with cottages. Well, that goes along with what we just said. You want to grow the city so that you can get all the population you can to work those cottages as quick as possible. So first is city growth and then is cottage growth. And the way you encourage city growth is by rule number 2, and that's building a granary in your cottage cities. He has an interesting rule that the optimal growth rate for your cottage cities is where the food surplus equals the happiness surplus. Okay, so how does this food surplus, happiness surplus rule work? So if you have extra happiness above the food surplus, then you build another farm. As your happiness surplus runs out, hold on. So increase your food surplus until you get it up to about the happiness surplus. Then as your city begins to fill up, your happy faces will get lower and lower, and at that point you move citizens from the farms to the cottages until you've replaced your farms with the cottages mostly. We're following that rule for the 10 tiles. Basically, you want food neutral for 10 tiles working cottages. You want that situation. Rule number 4, if your city's growing faster than workers can build tile improvements, a builder slave another worker. I think he gave somewhere else a general rule of about 1.5 workers per city. And for the most part, I'm finding about 10 workers for a lot of civilizations seems pretty good, um, at least on a fairly large map. Okay, so the buildings themselves are the golden science buildings in those cities, and you'll need a little bit of production to build them. So you'll certainly have to have some hammer resources um, in the area of that city, and you may have to whip some of the buildings in there. But he gives rule number 5: growing cottages is more important than building golden science improvements. So the idea here is your golden science improvements can't do anything until they get the gold. So you have to grow your cottages to have gold for your golden science buildings to multiply them. So you need to prioritize growing your cottages. So the general rule is you don't whip people to get a library off of cottages. They need to come off of some other tile. You want to keep working the cottages. If your base commerce is high enough that slave rushing a university increases the beaker count immediately, then it's okay to whip your population to build it. Now, Dave MCW's rule is that if you specialize your cottage cities, you'll save hammers on buildings, but you'll need these hammer cities to focus on settlers, workers, missionaries, military, and wonders. Well, he says the rule is 50% hammer and 50% commerce. But if you look at my other guide, when he starts off, he just has 2 hammer production cities, and the rest are commerce cities. So I think this 50% hammer, 50% commerce is just a very general rule. So he has 1 military for hammers, 2 general production hammers, 1 GP farm that produces commerce, and 2 cottage cities that produce commerce. But he admits it can vary depending on goals, which is what I said. That other guide really just does 2 production cities start worth and the rest commerce. All right, so he says for a domination victory, it might be 70% hammer and 30% commerce. Or like in a space race, you might have 70% commerce and 30% hammers. So Dave MCW says many good cottage cities are also good hammer cities or GP farms. Specialize cities according to what you need the most. For a grassland, for example, assign the hills or to hammer cities and your best food resource clump to a GP farm. Most of your empire, if it's mostly plains, put cottages on the green tiles, even if you can't fit 10 of them per city. He says floodplains are great, but remember those also carry health problems. So if you're next to a river, though, you get a health bonus from the river. A floodplain city with forest can double as a cottage city and GP farm. A floodplain city with hills can double as a cottage city and hammer city. He suggests you don't use food to feed plains cottages. So rule 6, plains should be ignored until scientific method. He explains that the specialists are more valuable than the plains cottages in the early game, except if the plains farms or workshops are in the heroic epic city, or plains cottages are in a capital running bureaucracy, or you have your financial is a leader and their river plains cottages. He uses scientific method as the marking place to start improving plains. But the key texts, he says, are democracy for cottages, emancipation, the emancipation civic, or biology, where, of course, your farming gives an extra food per farm, biology farms, workshops from chemistry, caste system, or state property, communism, and water mills from state property, from communism. All of those are helpful on plains tiles. If you have a plains-filled start position, he suggests you build up your missionary and just conquer better lands before you fall behind. So, in conclusion, cottages, he says, are essential for commerce and easy to use once you know the basics. A good cottage city can feed 10 cottages before biology. Build a granary as soon as possible in every city with cottages. The optimal growth rate for cottage cities is your food surplus equals the happiness surplus. If your city is growing faster than workers can build tile improvements, he suggests that you build or slave another worker. Growing cottages is more important than building gold and science improvements, and plains should be ignored until scientific method.